Okay. Wow, what a great audience. Hello to everybody here. Welcome. Can you hear me okay? Great. It's working. That's good. I'm hoping very much that our online audience can hear us as well. Welcome to you all. Welcome to the University of East Anglia for an event which is intended as a celebration of many things. This is such a lovely, exciting event, so thank you. A celebration of the end of our 18-month project at the British Archive for Contemporary Writing to begin to build a centre for contemporary poetry in the archive here at Norwich and at the university. It's also intended as a celebration for the publication of the project team's report and a collection of new writing by all of the poets involved. So a huge congratulations already. And finally, as a celebration of the first exhibition of those poets' archives, here in the foyer this evening. I know many of you have already been perusing this, and also online through the British Archive Contemporary Writings website. And congratulations to everybody who's been involved. I'm sure we'll hear more about that shortly. The project was funded by the New York-based Mellon Foundation Public Knowledge Programme with a grant of £209,000. Its aim was to address underrepresentation of diverse poetic practices and heritages in UK archives, with an emphasis on poets of colour and LGBTQ+ poets working in experimental, multimedia and spoken word poetics. One of the most important principles of this project was to make its work community-led. So the first people to thank this evening are our wonderful advisory group, a panel of experts drawn from the wider literary community who advised the UEA project team on a shortlist of poets to approach. I know there's several of you here this evening. Thank you very much indeed. As a result, we've been lucky enough to work with 4 dazzling voices in contemporary poetry: Jay Bernard, Anthony Varney Caballero, Gail MacDonnell, and Joelle Taylor. They were invited to deposit their archive papers under UEA's unique storehouse model, which takes materials on loan, allowing flexibility as a writer's career develops. They also led creative writing workshops in Norfolk Public Libraries, inviting library users to respond to their work and its concerns, and to contribute to the curation of the final archive. Those archives have now been catalogued and will be available by appointment to all visitors to consult from the 1st of December. So it's my pleasure this evening to welcome our 4 poets to their new archival home. The poets will be reading from their work and speaking with a visiting poetry fellow, Will Harris, who, I'm delighted to say, has also donated, special surprise, archive materials as part of his involvement in the project, which will also be catalogued and made available next year. Thank you so much, Will. It's really tremendous. Thank you. First of all, though, for this evening, we're going to hear from members of the project team who made all this happen. Dr. Jeremy Noel Todd, on my right here, who led the academic side of the project, and Justine Mann, just next to him, the project archivist extraordinaire. Georgina Colby, who worked as a senior research fellow, and Eve Matthews, who coordinated the Norfolk Public Library workshops. They're going to be speaking with Peggy Hughes, director of the Norwich National Centre for Writing in Norwich, who've been such important community partners in this work. Thank you so much, Peggy, and all your team. There are, of course, as with all collaborative creative projects, so many people to thank with regard to a project such as this. But I can't even begin to list everybody now. Instead, the project report that Jeremy's already been highlighting, there you go again, which you can read in the foyer, which will also be available as a PDF online, has at least a page of names and acknowledgements, and we're very, very grateful to each and every one of you. But just for tonight, I'd like to highlight, on behalf of the university, a few thanks. First of all, to our funders, the Mellon Foundation, without whom none of this would have been possible. Next, everyone at UEA who's come together to make this evening possible. Thanks to all the teams. These events take so much work and we're so grateful. And finally, our 4 PhD students who contributed hugely to curating the brilliant exhibition cases that you can see just outside there in the foyer. And lastly, a huge thank you to all of you in the auditorium here and online, turning out this evening, this gorgeous winter, beautiful evening, to show your interest and enthusiasm for this truly pioneering project that could only happen here at UEA, and I know that. For the importance of poetry to arts and humanities at UEA now and in the future. We really hope that many of you will return to explore these exciting archives. Thank you and congratulations. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, great. I don't have to shout. It's lovely to be here. Thank you from me too for everyone being here. My nice job is to question the project team and to get behind the scenes a little bit and hear some of their reflections on how it worked. Did it work? Where are we now? What are we thinking? And we're basically going to go in the order of Justine and Jeremy and then Georgina and Eve. So we've got a lot to cover and we'll just get going. As Sarah said, Justine, you are the lead archivist, and I would say chief architect, really, of this project. I wonder, to set us off, if you could tell us a little bit about the starting engine for this project. What question were you trying to answer?
So when the British Archive for Contemporary Writing was first established in 2015, there were already conversations about building a poetry collection. So there was already a kind of, where's the poetry? That was one question, because we have archives from novelists and from non-fiction writers and comedy writing, script writing, but poetry was a bit of an absence in the archive. So the former academic director, Josh Smith, who's here with us this evening, had conversations with Jeremy and others in the School of Literature, Drama and Creative Writing to think about putting together a collection of poetry. And in fact, in 2019, that was formalised at our governance group, the group that oversees the collections and our collection development with the library, sort of members of staff from the academic side of the institution. But actually, there were a couple of really big projects in the way, and it's a sort of finite team, finite resource. So the last of those projects was celebrating 50 years of creative writing at UEA, and that kind of celebration and the work that the archive did kind of came to an end in 2021. And it was literally just as we were putting that project to bed in April 2021 that the Mellon Foundation wrote and said, would you be interested in building a poetry archive? And of course, we already had those ideas kind of ready to go. So a question came from the Mellon Foundation, are you up for this?
And you were, and here we are.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So tell us more. Sarah mentioned in the introduction the concept of the storehouse model. Perhaps not everybody here is familiar with what that means. Could you unpack that a little bit? It's quite an interesting model for an archive.
Absolutely. So when the archive was first set up, other institutions, literary archives can sell for big sums of money, particularly in the United States, and also institutions in the UK purchase archives. So, for example, the British Library and National Library of Scotland and a few others, a few universities as well. But UEA was never going to purchase archives. We already had strong relationships with writers, and we're interested in building collections of people who were a bit earlier in their career, so emerging writers, people who were just beginning to be established. And we thought that would be a really exciting collection for our students and researchers and UNESCO City of Literature, wider public to enjoy in this location. But the storehouse model kind of came about through necessity because we can't purchase archives. We could approach writers and say, actually, we're just going to borrow this material for a short period of time. If you want it back, you can have it at 6 months' notice. So other institutions looked at us kind of aghast that we were doing this because it was so not the traditional model. Usually it would be a 20-year loan minimum, or some institutions just won't do loans at all. And I think that's a kind of you know, in some ways I can respect that decision. It's about resource, it's about investing time in those collections, cataloguing. But by taking a discrete collection in, we felt we were able, that was a calculated risk on our part. We could kind of, you know, catalogue it and make it available and care for it and collaborate with writers. So it kind of was a model that worked for us. And actually that's what attracted the Mellon Foundation. That's why they were interested in UEA, because they saw that as a potential way to accelerate better representation in archives. Because if you wait until someone's towards the end of their working life or until they've died, it was quite a long time for change to take place. So I think they saw it as a potential
an intervention, as it were. Yeah, and it does lend a certain fleetness of foot. I think that's something Will draws out in his section of the Brilliant Project report. There's a kind of nimbleness to the storehouse model that is not achievable perhaps elsewhere. In the project report, you talk about the idea of the archive bringing sort of order to chaos, or that kind of idea. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about where in this piece the chaos was for you, if any, probably none, and where the order.
So one of the exciting things about this project is the Mellon Foundation wanted us to take a community-led approach, and by community-led they meant poet-led. And so that's where forming an advisory group and thinking about which poets would be approached to see if they're interested in depositing, all of that was a shared approach. And that meant that, you know, we got very different poets depositing and very different archives and different kind of writing methods as well. So a kind of beautiful chaos in terms of, you know, that material coming in and then look at it and kind of cataloguing it. And what an archive usually does is catalogue and try to make that a neutral kind of catalogue, and then, you know, leave that for supposedly neutral anyway. People would argue about that for hours, but make it available for researchers to enjoy. But actually, one of the other strands of this project was kind of thinking about being more collaborative with the curation. So the poets have produced a kind of response to the archive, so that's kind of way through the archive. So there's the curators, the PhD curators that have also developed a kind of pathway through the archive, and then there's the catalogue, and then there's the public responses. So in a way, that was quite chaotic, kind of pulling all of those strands together, but I feel like the exhibition is kind of trying, and the digital exhibition, which launches in December, will also try and, you know, kind of help people enjoy those different kind of lenses on the material and ways through.
And I hope you've had a chance to look at the exhibition outside. It's really brilliant. Really brilliant, congrats. I mean, you've worked in libraries and archives for 3 decades, your bio tells me. What did archives mean to you before this project, and what perhaps do they mean now? Do they mean something different?
Yeah, I think definitely the archives and libraries that I've worked in up until this point, really, it's been about kind of once something comes into an archive or a library, that it's kind of owned, that it's yours to do with, what, you know, that kind of transactions taken place and it's your collection. So what's very different about this model is that it still feels like more collaborative, more like a stewardship of the material. And this is one of the recommendations in the report, actually, is that institutions, if they want to grow their collections and for there to be kind of better representation, that it needs to take that more of a stewardship approach where you're kind of working with the depositor, and that it's not about ownership. It's, yeah.
Yep.
So that's a big shift, I think, from my previous decades.
Indeed, yeah. My final question for you, Justine, is just this event marks an ending of sorts. You know, that we're here, the archives are deposited and so on. But actually it's really a beginning, and I wonder if you could say a little bit about what next for the archive. How will it be engaged with? How will it be used going forward from here?
So the archives will be available from the 1st of December for anyone who wants to come and explore. And there'll be, you know, a digital representation of it as well for those who can't come and to be in our reading room. And we do definitely see this as a pilot. You know, it was trying the storehouse model with a different range of writers, and so potentially, you know, progressing this model, continuing to evolve it. But I think the work that Georgina's done on small press poetry, which Georgina will come to talk about a bit more, is, you know, potentially an area for development. But definitely, and Eve will talk about this as well, the idea of that stuff doesn't just sit on the shelf waiting for someone to arrive in the reading room, that, you know, we take this material out and share it and get the wider public to enjoy it. So hopefully more of that as well.
Superb. Yes, we will come to both of you. I'm excited to hear more about that work. But Jeremy, to you first, if I may. You've mentioned in your part of the project report, which I think you'll all, there's copies, or it's available online, the project report in full that everyone can engage with, and definitely worth a look. But you cite Stuart Hall saying no archive arises out of thin air. So I wonder if you could talk about that, not thin air. What were the practical considerations, the team that you've assembled around yourselves to make this happen?
Yeah, the opposite of thin air. That's from a really important essay to the project by Stuart Hall called Constituting an Archive, a short essay about an archive of African and Asian artists from the turn of the century, which was brought together, and he reflects on what is it to build an archive of underrepresented artists. And the essay begins by emphasizing that archives build on work that people have already done. So archives tend to come out of communities that have already been doing archival work, but it wasn't called an archive. And very often these people are also practitioners. You know, they might well be the artists themselves, archiving themselves, and that's been a real theme of the project. How do we sort of, as it were, raise awareness, kind of, you know, communicate with people? How do I archive my own work? But also, you know, there are community-minded people, archival-minded people who voluntarily over many years just make sure that they preserve, you know, they steward things that they consider of value until such time as there might be an institutional home for it. So, yeah, that feels like a really important principle behind the project. But, yeah, in terms of putting our project together, Justine's already given you some of the history and the really fortuitous sort of timing of Mellon coming along and there being these ideas in the air, and Joss Smith, my predecessor in the academic director role, getting this project going, doing a draft of the application, which that then we continue to work on. And then just thinking, okay, so who are the other people we need around it, you know, sort of mapping it in concentric circles. Okay, so it can't just be me and Justine. We're going to need somebody else on the team, and that became Will Harris, our visiting poetry fellow. But then we're going to need a sort of another layer of people, and that will be our advisory group. And I suppose really what we were doing here was mapping that sense of community, which in the report I think of as having kind of three overlapping layers: the literary community, and that was what the advisory group represented. Peggy, you're a member of the advisory group. We had a partner from the Norfolk Library Service. We had poets and critics and publishers. Kate Birch from Ink, Sweat and Tears, very important person in the local Norwich scene. So there was that level, and then sort of further around it, we had what, you know, in the slightly unlovely language of grant making is called a stakeholder group. But, you know, that's people working in archives, literary agents, people, you know, who have an interest in this question of the value of a literary archive. So by the time the project had got going, I sort of felt reassured that, you know, as it were, it wasn't all on me. There were rings around it, yeah.
I mean, that idea of community is a really interesting one, actually, and you talk about that in the report. And earlier today, we recorded a podcast with the poets for the National Centre, and that idea of community came up again in the interleaving of these archives and these experiences. I think it's often forgotten, though. It's something you yourself in the report say, Jeremy. It's often forgotten when it comes to archives, and I wonder if you could have got a view on why that is, and how a project like this might lead the way in that particular area.
The
community and community engagement and involvement
is often forgotten.
Archives.
Yeah. Well, as Justine was saying, you know, that was a steer that we had from Mellon, who were very collaborative themselves. And, you know, for me, as a UK academic, that itself felt like quite a different model, having, you know, a kind of a community relationship with the funder. You know, what do we want to do together? So that really helped us to think, well, what does it mean to be poet-led? Obviously, we want poets to be involved in it, but also to advise on it. But then there's the question of you know, how do you work it into the community where it's happening? I mean, for me, you know, as an academic here who specialises in poetry, it's very exciting that we're bringing these archives here, and they can potentially be used for teaching as well as research. But also the wider community in Norfolk, you know, which is why we had the Norfolk Public Library Service involved, and this question of place that came up. a lot in the project. You know, there's the question of, well, why come to Norwich? And Gail and Jay in particular sort of asked this question, and you know, the answers were really interesting. And I think we designed the project so that those questions would be asked. You know, in a sense, we didn't want to make it easy for ourselves. We wanted this challenge. Well, why should I bring my archive to UEA and leave it there? So the question of relationship to place came up on the poet's side, but then there's the question of, well, why have it here at all? What, you know, what is it for people who live nearby or potentially have access to it, you know, to have this kind of archive? So that was something we wanted to test through the library work, you know, producing the results that are in the foyer, and all the wonderful feedback that came from those workshops.
You've touched briefly there on just some of the big questions that come out of this kind of work, and we talked about it earlier today, and Gail said, you know, in the archive there are always big questions. I wonder what some of those bigger questions that arose from this for you were.
Whew, the big questions, now you're asking. I mean, you know, there are so many ethical questions around archives all the time. You know, obviously I'm a poetry critic, I'm a teacher, I'm a researcher. Gail is too in her professional life, and that came into her reflections. You know, what is it to go into this stuff that is sort of private and to have this access to it, and then what do you make of it? But also, what do you expect of it? You know, the question of completeness became quite important, because obviously the storehouse model doesn't propose completeness. It proposed sampling. I think Will used the metaphor of a soil sample in his reflections. And that is very different to other kinds of models of the archive. And at the end of the report, in Georgina's contribution, she says what somebody on the advisory group, Sandeep Palmer, said, is that it's important for the archive not to conceive of gaps as incompleteness, but to actually understand them as part of what has been preserved. So yeah, I think a lot of the standard assumptions around what an archive is were being looked at again. All the while, I feel I should add, while I was learning how to be the academic director of an archive, because I'd only just begun. Lovely.
Lots to learn, lots to think about in there. I'm going to have to move on, unfortunately, and keep us moving. But Georgina, then, I just wonder if you could start us off by talking a little bit about your role in this. Obviously, your work's been alluded to in the research you've been doing, but could you just say a little bit more about that and at what stage you came into the project?
Yeah, I joined the project about a year into the project, and my role was to be a senior research fellow. And wonderfully, I can't say this without grinning from ear to ear, to go to archives and to look at small press collections, to look at the extent and nature of those small press collections that, as it turned out, were hugely varied, and to think about the role of the small presses in promoting underrepresented poetries. And also the role of small press communities and poetry communities in representing socially marginalised poetries.
Wonderful. And I think something that came out of reading the work you've been doing around it, Georgina, was that idea of ephemeralness, small presses and their kind of inherent ephemeral nature, which seems at some kind of tension or at odds with an archive. I wonder if you wanted to just reflect on that a little bit for us.
Yeah, so what came out of my research was a number of permutations of ephemerality. We have the small presses themselves that are ephemeral and much more at risk of closing than large presses. They're much more vulnerable to the economic climate and the unstable economic climate. And there's also the ephemerality of the actual poetries themselves, in that formerly innovative poetries are by nature ephemeral.
Hello.
Formerly innovative poetries are by nature ephemeral. So an example of this is the way in which formerly innovative poetries are disseminated but created within the ephemeral spaces, such as poetry readings. A great example is from Joelle. When I was talking to Joelle in our conversation about small press, working with small presses, Joelle told me about the performances and that she would sometimes adapt the poems to suit the audiences. I see it as kind of a form of solidarity in many ways, so really responding to the audience on the night. So what happens to that? So what happens to that poem that's there in the moment? I mean, that's a very specific form of ephemerality that arguably can't be archived and shouldn't be archived. And that's something that came up speaking to Will as well, who suggested that, you know, the archive isn't really a natural place for contemporary, formerly innovative poetries or contemporary poetries for this reason. The more natural place is, you know, poetry readings, the impermanent space on the bookshelf. But not the archive with its sort of demand for permanence. So not the traditional archive with its demand for permanence. So there is a real tension between the impermanence and ephemerality that is inherent to contemporary, formerly innovative poetries and the traditional forms of archiving. So this is basically picking up on what Jeremy was just saying, that the new forms of archiving, there's a need to somehow shelter or give space to that ephemerality, acknowledge it, not expect archives to be complete with all the versions. Jay also spoke about ephemerality when they spoke about workshops, like the importance of the workshop as an ephemeral kind of transient space where you know, poetry is actually created, you know, and so those kind of drafts, again, those drafts could be conversations, those drafts could be, you know, in the moment improvisations or working in collaboration with somebody. So that sense of those different permutations of ephemerality, and then what to do with this in terms of the archive, like as in how can an archive accommodate ephemerality? And just to let you know, we don't have the answers to that yet. So yeah, that was...
Thank you. Perfect. And it leads us really neatly onto our fourth and final person, Eve, who worked on these workshops, in fact, and where the poetry met the public. I wonder, Eve, could you tell us a little, what was your brief? What were you coming in to do when you got here to do it?
So I was the project coordinator for the Norfolk Library and Information Service. So essentially, I was the one organising the 4 workshops that we held in Deptford, Kings Lynn, Cromer and Great Yarmouth. And that involved kind of from the very early stages, chatting to each of the poets about kind of, oh, what's your idea for this workshop then? What are you thinking of going for? And also chatting to the library managers. Who are the public that you serve? Who are the people that come to your library? Are there people that you would like to get into your library a bit more? What writing groups do you already have? Is there a lack of writing groups? Why is that? And we kind of started matching up the poets in their libraries, and then kind of I was the one handling kind of all of the logistics. So that included like getting food for everyone, booking the rooms, kind of all the boring stuff that no one else had to deal with, but I did. Necessary boring stuff.
During a rail strike, no less.
During a rail strike that caused me major stress several times. But yeah.
And we're seeing some of that amazing work out there. I mean, you were at all of the workshops. What were they like? I mean, they were brilliantly received, as we can see. But
yeah, they were fantastically received. And as like a library and information like professional, it was just incredible to watch as well. They were just all like incredible wonderful, you know, we've talked a lot about community in this workshop, and the thing is about libraries, they're wonderful community spaces, and it was just wonderful to see so many people coming from these kind of like small towns and coming together and enjoying writing together and actually doing a writing workshop with professionals. One of our feedback forms, someone had said kind of, I thought I'd have to go to London to go to something like this. I didn't even think I'd get something like this in Norwich, and I live in Cromer, and I was able to go to this, and it was like in my high street. And actually, I think that was really important to people to show that, you know, it doesn't matter if you're from like a small town in Norfolk. You deserve to get like these high quality workshops where you're looked after and kind of you're fed, and you get to feel really confident in your writing at the end, and you get to hear some amazing writing by some amazing poets as well.
What an amazing thing. Any last words of any surprises that these participants in these workshops brought to your view on archives?
I don't know about necessarily with archives specifically, but just so we did have another person in the library service who is one of our community librarians. She came to one of our workshops. She came to our Cromer one. And I had a chat with her about it afterwards, because obviously she was there as a participant, but also she is a library professional as well. And so she had a really unique take on it. And she was like, it really does show what we can do, what amazing results we can have when we have properly well-funded projects running in libraries, in public libraries. And that was really rewarding to hear and see.
Brilliant. Well, congrats, everybody. I think we can say it's here, it's happening. Thank you all, thank you all. I think we're going to get off stage and let the poets join. Yeah.
Hello. It's just the poets shuffling on really awkwardly after that very, very polished Q&A. So I thought we'd, just have some readings, and then we're going to have a short discussion. So we're going to hear. You should all have your copy of this amazing pamphlet, which features responses from each of the 4 poets to the project. They've all taken very different approaches, really excitingly different approaches, and I think you'll hear a sample of that and maybe of something else in some cases. And we're going to hear from them in the order in which they're in the pamphlet. I could do bios, but I think there are bios. I mean, everyone knows who they are. Should I do a bio? Should I do bios? No. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to hear from Anthony Varney, and then Anthony Varney Capildeo, Jay Bernard, Gail McConnell, and then finally Joelle Taylor.
Hello everyone, this is off, isn't it? Hi everyone, is this working now? Okay, thank you so much for being here. And I must say that what Jeremy was saying about mapping community resonated with me very much, and one of the most extraordinary moments for me of the whole project was having a little extra time in King's Lynn because of the rail strike, and being very aware of the layers of history, both the richness and the poverty of the history of a great medieval port like that. And then encountering the liveliness of the poetry community in that library with extraordinary windows. That really was one of the highlights for me. Now, another highlight for me is that the archive is based in Norwich, and I'm not going to be anticipating the conversation with Will, but for me, Norwich holds a lot of memories, more than 20 years worth of memories of revisiting the place. And I've heard some extraordinary things here. I've heard stories of Africa from old Norwich ladies who grew up speaking Swahili in very tiny communities. And I've heard a Palestinian Christian cleric preaching in Norwich Cathedral about searching our hearts. And therefore, I'm going to ask us to search our hearts, and as an outward and visible reminder of complicity, I shall be putting on a couple of red gloves. Give me a second. Thank you so much. What I still and no longer believe. The body is not an archive. It is archived in fire. My earliest childhood memories include the handling of hot, sharp things. At the Festival of Lights, Diwali, non-Hindu friends visited us on the night when we lit up. My age was single figures of years when I learned to arrange rows of diyas, earthenware lamps, and fill them with oil. Terracotta red, the diyas were like small bowls with sharply sloped sides and a flat base. They fit in my hand. The circle of their thick rim was not broken but extended into a point where a wick could rest. I learned to hand-roll wicks from cotton wool, twisting and oiling two rolled strands, as a single strand would burn too fast. The ceremonial diyas were bigger, filled with ghee, and with triple-stranded wicks, perhaps the finely rolled fabric ones that must have been purchased, but just seemed to arrive, folded and tied in bundles, miniature bales of the promise of light. We lined the paths of the garden and the edges of the house with these lamps. It was a child's job to take the matches and light one diya, then light the next diya from it, the next from the next. What the non-Hindu visiting friends did not know, though I'm sure I tried to tell them, was that other lamps had been lit in previous days. In a separate part of the garden towards the east, we had special diyas, one for each member of the household, hallowed and placed after a fire ceremony my father led. Out with the main gate, a diya had been broken and discarded. This was for Yamdeep. It belonged to the Lord of Death. And then I detail the ceremony, and I'm going to skip forward to the paragraph beginning, for Diwali was New Year. The lunar calendar ran alongside the Western secular calendar and was deeper than it. Because what I'm talking about here is how time has got different strands twisted together. Each of these times also opens and drops into deep time, the interstellar space of making and unmaking of universes cyclically by the gods. The transgenerational histories, perhaps unknown in words, but recorded in our body's impulses to cocoon, fight, dance, or flee, the taste of pencil point and migraine bile. The body is not an archive, it is archived in fire. The double helix of DNA is overly simple. The physical body extends into the subtle body. We are sensitive, extensible, partly invisible. My life's work's motto could be, for love of things invisible. And that concludes my reading. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, perfect. Lovely. Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's sort of funny to be at the end of the project. It sort of zipped by in an instant. And earlier on, we were talking a lot about sort of time and kind of what it is and how crucial it is to this kind of idea of the archive. And I sort of wanted in my kind of creative response to almost narrow it down to a really specific time, and that was the time that I spent in Great Yarmouth, almost to sort of to kind of try and see the big ideas of this project through those few days, to see how they kind of mapped onto my engagements with the workshop participants, with a poet in Great Yarmouth, Lottie, as well, who I think is here even, and through like walking around the town, to try to kind of embody, I think, some of the ideas, the big ideas, for example, in the panel earlier, and sort of make them concrete. After throwing an injured shark back into the sea, after a work call, after an egg, cheese and tomato sandwich, after takeaway noodles, after spending my evening in the arcade, after almost winning but not quite, after throwing stones into the sea, after throwing myself in the sea, after photographing stones for their textures, after recording the fizz of the night waves, after walking around the ex-industrial areas, after listening to a Brexiteer accidentally say something racist, after watching the construction of the new bridge, after planning the workshop, after Googling the man standing on a plinth outside my hotel room window, after Portuguese grilled fish, after reading up on Bernard Matthews' turkey drumsticks, after trying to talk about ideas of history, after noticing the boredom and impatience on one participant's face, after a disappointing burger for dinner, after some amazing eggs for breakfast, after writing and losing all of my notebooks around haunting and history, after trying to watch TV, after consoling myself about something that happened a decade ago, after consoling myself about something that happened a few months ago, after suddenly getting an idea for a poem, after writing a draft and then feeling empty and dirty, after revisiting Svetlana Alexievich, after rewatching Parts of London by Patrick Keeler, after having a sudden and profound idea about the future of my work, after going to the toilet and immediately forgetting the idea about the future of my work, after realizing that I've had no fruit for several days, after meeting an older guy who takes care of all the kids, after thinking about Akugo Emejulu's work on fugitivity, after playing table football in a dark youth club, after writing out dozens of questions around history and the archive, after feeling sick with nerves after a pint, after watching the sunset and remembering Anthony Varney's comment about the evening being light blue in Britain and purple in Trinidad, after talking to Gail about how much or how little is enough or too much, after reading Walcott, after touring Derek Jarman's Blue with Joelle, after the exhilaration and decline, after the shark, after having done so many bad readings and so many good ones, after the workshop, after listening to so many others speak about the archives, after escaping the area I grew up in, after considering moving back, after beginning to feel as though the archive might be a euphemism, after fish and chips, after visiting the city walls, after realizing that I love textures and am moved by them in ways I can't describe, after Fiona Benson telling me the secret to why grass is so beautiful and compelling, after the shark's bloody head and gaping mouth, after taking off my shoes to walk back to the hotel barefoot, after being rejected by friends, after finding fault after fault, after reading my own poems on stage for 20 years, after the endless knot of love, after deciding for myself that art and politics are separate, yet remaining uncertain about this, after Walcott, Rich and Dewig, after finally eating a banana. And it's not done. In short, I write, I think the concept of the archive is slowly being detached from its materiality. And this concept, much like ideas of the post-colonial or ideas around queer theory, seems to be more about itself and its own coherence than about the set of socio-political problems it has inherited. What is the true remedial power at this new juncture? How do we tackle the problem of vast quantities and limited time? I've just come back from a walk on the beach. The view outside my window is the car park, and beyond that a cafe, and beyond that the giant new bridge, and a faintly coloured collage of low-rise housing, ex-industrial buildings and warehouses. Yet another draft of ideas, thoughts, recollections. I can't seem to shake the feeling that whenever I open my mouth, whenever I try to talk about my uneasiness, I am critiquing the hand that feeds me. I look out at the sea. The beach is here, stunning, despite being only a few hundred meters from the pier. A few days before, I'd been walking here with Lottie Allès, the poet who'd been a fixer for my workshop, and a kind of tour guide around Great Yarmouth. I didn't want to parachute in as a London poet without learning about what was going on in the town. It was too brief a visit for me to feel fully embedded. But I got the sense of someone grappling with the reality of being a writer outside the spectacle of the big city, who cannot rely on the plush tradition that characterises London, but instead must create something responsive, situated. I tried to think about the need for witness as neither listener or teller, but as a generative presence of that which has happened, or that which may happen, or that which brings that which happened or may happen into existence again. Ironically, she also quotes another poet, Katerina Gogo, who expresses the tension between the political and the poetic with the very action that animates this piece. What I fear most is becoming a poet, locking myself in the room, gazing at the sea and forgetting. The afternoon that we went walking together, we'd suddenly come across the body of a fish lying on the sand. Lottie took her shoes off and tried to flip it back into the sea with her feet, but after a few attempts we realised it was pointless. There was a hole in the top of its head, filling with blood, which would then be washed away with every wave. We Googled it, and it turned out to be a squalid-eye or dog shark. In the end, we left it there, but we made sure to document it first. I don't think there is any profound metaphor here, except for a compelling feeling I had when I tried to see the situation from the shark's point of view. All that time it would have spent in the water, to then die a slow, unusual death on land. I tried to imagine its flailing view of this alien world with its hazy white above and brown crunch below, and the shark looking out at its old paradigm, the sea, with new knowledge it could neither comprehend nor transmit. Okay, thank you.
Hello. It's really lovely to be here. Thanks for coming out. I'm struck by what Georgina said earlier about the ephemerality, and I like the poem as a sonic event. I didn't feel like I put a lot of poems into the archive, but I want to bring you some this evening. But first, some other sentences. When I was first invited to place my materials in the UEA archive for this project, I assumed that I would deposit papers from the Dad box. This is a mint green cardboard box from IKEA filled with newspaper cutouts, letters, reports, diaries, and other slips of paper related to the life, but mostly to the death of my father. He was assistant governor in the Maze prison, and he was murdered by the IRA outside our home in Belfast in 1984. I was 3.5. My poetry book, The Sun is Open, quotes from papers in that box to work through this trauma and its aftermath. And it's a book that thinks about the complexity of working with those materials, of speaking of and to the dead, of becoming an echo to those sources, and of making judgments about the relative value of the material kept in the box. Thinking about what to read tonight, The Sun is Open fell open at a double-facing page that I normally never read in public, but I'm going to read them now. First the right-hand page, and then the left. A paler shade. Still grey, that square, the mark there on the floor where Dad box isn't. Some sound somewhere, some sound along the road, in through the skylight, aisles maybe, no, not aisles around here. It's back in the spare room again. I had it here beside my desk while typing. I don't want to see it now. Parallelogram. The word we learned in primary 4. This sunlight on a wooden floor. On the one side, the Dad box. In its absence and imagined presence, I'm noticing a mark on the floor where the archive is not. I've deliberately removed it from view. Its imprint remains. And on the other side, a different kind of mark on the floor, sunlight, a parallelogram of light, impermanent, a little gift, an unexpected warmth, absence and presence. It struck me that these are the dynamics at the heart of the archive project. What is hidden from view and what can be seen plainly, even in its slantedness. Aftermath and surprise. What to put in, what to hold back, what to give, what to keep. These are the questions that arise, some of those difficult questions that Peggy was asking Jeremy about earlier. An archive holds the voices of the dead, paler shades indeed. That was very clear to me because of the archive I knew best, the Dad box. Partly for that reason, I didn't choose to put any material from the Dad box into UEA's storehouse. Instead, I wanted materials that were more obviously on the side of life and the living. and materials that had a connection to this place. So I chose to store materials related to Father Mather, a pamphlet of poems about queerness and new parenthood, published by Ink, Sweat and Tears and launched here in Norwich in 2019. Father Mather came about through the Cafe Writers Poetry Pamphlet Competition. Kate Birch is the powerhouse behind Ink, Sweat and Tears, and she's also established poetry scholarships at UEA. And Jay Bernard was a previous winner of the competition and published their pamphlet, The Red and Yellow Nothing, the previous year. And that pamphlet was a revelation, which showed me the possibilities of the pamphlet form. And Jay was one of the judges, and the shortlisting and decision-making was done in Helen Ivory's house in Norwich. And just before Father Mather was published, Anthony Vanni Capildeo wrote the most extraordinary essay about it, Speaking Seahorse, in PN Review. They had read and encouraged the work, and it was an honour to extract some lines from that essay to blurb the pamphlet. So for all those reasons, it felt right to choose to share Father Mather material for this project and this archive. There was a connection to the institution, the city, and to two of the other poets involved in the project. And Father Mather was a project about formation and transformation, as well as queerness, attachment, and love. So I'm going to read a poem from that. It's actually the last poem in the pamphlet. An apple seed. Apple, cup, and shell. I say these things to you. I read them from the book. Book, book. This is a book. You roll yourself to where the sound must be. To sound, to word, to thing, to me, the mouth that sounds out shell. You watch my lips to see the shell come out. Come out, shell. The shell comes out and curls itself around the air again. The thing itself is waves of sound. For sound it is a swimming, moving to and fro, vibrating shell, the peel and rind, creaturely home upon a time. Space-time is soft-bodied, Einstein said. The mollusk, we are in a constant flux, the quantum world, stretching, twisting, curving your small body to my own, your hands against my lips, your fingers on my tongue. What is that sound? What currency is this? What vessel for existing? Shell. When you were still in shell, we counted you in days. 2 cells on day 1, 4 the second day, 6 the third, when you were placed inside another room to make your way. An apple seed, a blueberry, an ear of corn, a coconut. The day of shelling came and went, till 2 weeks on you flexed. We were 2 souls, something like scales, something like shells were falling from our eyes. As out you came, you come out with a cry just like the ah of apple. There's a little bit more. Maybe this is the body as the archive, the mouth in which the words take shape, and the archive of language with its histories, etymologies, and speech as an event in time, the poem a sonic event, embodied, breathed into this room in ways the archive can't quite manage, maybe. Time passes, the cells multiply and grow, a birth, more growth, and suddenly our child is 5. So here's a yet to be published, yet to be archived, maybe even yet to be finished poem to finish. And thank you so much for listening. Do you want the poem? Okay, you want the poem. In the season of everything falling, it's 9:24 where I'm writing this, or is for now. Someone's going at it with one of those god-awful leaf blowers somewhere down the road. I'm spent. It's only been 3 hours of aliveness less, but I'm done in. There was the being woken by a taco delivered to my bedded body, placed atop me the plate, the taco being our son inside a lion blanket, wrapped up snug. Then comes the part where I exclaim, "This isn't a taco, it's a boy," And all the giggles come, the wriggling begins, the wrestling, biffing, bopping, playing just along the line where rough and safety touch, where biff bam pushes, boom bam pows are choreoed and trust, and where the bigger person, me, must shape the line by taking what is here to be discharged and keeping safe this restless, wrestling taco. So, when the cries come hard and red drops meet the spotless cotton, fresh white snow, blood dotted here and there and there and there, and still the cries, my own heart clenched within me as I pressed him to my body, held the wails and held him close, hope not to faint as I've been known to do on seeing this, our substance company with flesh and bone. There's quite a lot of blood. It happens with the mouth. And yes, my lovely sheets are also on my mind. Their tabby weave, the warp and woof, both white, a cotton, somehow soft and hard at once. The weave itself is give and take, go over one, go under one, the in and out, the alternations, snotting, sobbing, his sobs slowing now, the blood mopped up in tissues, and I'm still holding him so close. What can I do? What have I done? His little lip meeting my shin, and then the blood, which seems to mean the lines are perforated one now, rough and safety touched, and then the hurt. But how I hold him, how I mop and soothe and clean his lip and settle him, feeling bad, but trying not to go there, not to linger there too long so I can care for him and not my ego. He hugs me, eats some scrambled eggs, drinks apple juice. I kiss his face, collapse my face with laughter when his pants are on his head. Do the usual, please put on your coat, put on your coat, put it on now. An accident's a happening. It's from the verb to fall. And if you could hear me say this poem, you'd hear my cadence wobble.
Hello. I decided to write a crown of sonnets, which is 15 sonnets that are kind of related to each other. It came from my own little personal archive, which is a snow globe that I always have above my desk. It was gifted to me by the first friend I had who died of AIDS, and he left each of us a snow globe, and it became the sort of instigation. Is that even a word? It became the thing that propelled me to write canto and other poems, which was my last collection. And so for this, I wanted to look back into the snow globe and to use this form because a crown of sonnets takes the last line in the first sonnet as the first line in the next, and then the final, the 15th sonnet, is all the last lines put together. And I wanted to use that to see what I really thought. And so this is it. It's called Dust Kings, Tough Kids, which is tough kids is an old euphemism for dykes. 1. For boys slow dancing in snow globes, moored in suits stitched from rainfall, who hold each other like eggs from which they will hatch, punch curious, alert to the wild, as snow falls like empires. Grass grows through the dance floor, and the boys are like butterflies. Everything cracks in the end, but not this hand, this idea. Some nights it snows spare change or saliva, handkerchiefs or charge sheets. Dust kings and tough kids, we had nothing, and we shared it. 2. We had nothing, and we shared it, a neat division of air, awoke spinning on bar stools or crawling from hedgerows naked. We took these skins from shop windows, Savile Row, Paris, Bangkok. We were trying to remember why we died, or if there was a sound, if the birds forgot the words to their songs, or if the sky called our mothers. We were trying to remember if we were special. Jack keeps saying goodnight, but she can't remember who to. We are reborn in the bar beneath the city, each of us haunting the holes of our bodies. 3. We were haunting the holes of our bodies long before we were squeezed from our skins. We were ghosts of school linoleum corridors, ghosts of the changing room, ghosts of the long walk home, the boardroom, the ballot box. We were ghosts of our mouths. We were watercolors in rainfall dissolving on the streets, the back seats of buses erased, invisible, a taste, heavy air. When and how we died unnoticed. It's hard to kill something that isn't there. But we were sacred before we surrendered. This much each of us remembers. 4. What each of us remembers comes as snow in the globe, gold binary code. It comes fractal. We hold the memory and it sobs. George returns, leaning over the pool table, the bowls escaping their holes. My head, she says, and we look through a hole in her skull toward her last moments. The breath, the blue, violent circus that chased her out of her skin. Here, we rise headfirst from pint glasses or materialize in ironic lines for the ladies, each nursing a wound, a violet baby. 5. We each nursed a wound, a violet baby. Lacamiona Makora unravels a bruise like a blueprint, a map of her final route, the topography of body. When we lean close, we see the fist swarm who followed from the bar, as though tied by strings to her waist, umbilical somehow, a leash, a howl, dog men drawn by the scent of dissidence, of independence, of stubborn. She didn't mean it, any of it. Shirts are just shirts. Shaved hair returns like evening tide. But the night hung limp in their jaws, punctured into heavenly bodies. She rolled a cigarette, smiled when they caught her. Red in water. All hail the nonconformist daughter. 6. Red in water. All hail the nonconformist daughter. All hail ugly. All hail disobedience. And women who identify as freedom, as justice, as hope for fuck's sake in the face of those who would bury the rainbow. A clutter of jack-rolling boys, Tucker, translating kisses into curses, fear into prophecy, their pornographic grins a woman splayed, red curtains parting, dark entertainment. When jack-rolling smiles connect, they make a red-lit lane leading to a flick of blue light somewhere south of here. It's a bonding, a ritual, cocks held like crucifixes. A woman's body is always a man's business. They would have left her if she had begged forgiveness. 7. They would have left her if she had begged forgiveness. Damned activist, evangelist, feminist. She's agitating here still, in the other side, back straight behind the bar, as though at the hustings in El Salvador, or was it Chile, Brazil? Marielle can't quite piece together all the pieces. There are 13, ricochet. Only that when she opened her mouth, they chased the words back inside. Only that the police are sickly dogs circling. Only that violence is a black woman speaking. Only that when the gun called her name, she answered. Only that sometimes bullets are seeds, and that some women's bodies are the site of their protest. Some women are buried in the graves between their legs. 8. Some of us are buried in the graves between our legs. We open them like books, and the past falls out, fully formed, blooded, blinking. Our mothers fall out, clutching the hands of their mothers, until the whole paper chain of women, arms linked like chromosomes, is pulled into the sun. And in this way, we inherit each other's grief. which is a kind of a coat, is a kind woman nodding silently across the bus seats. A word returned to its birthplace. A silent knowing is a language that teaches the tongue to be still. We inherit one another, which is a kind of a warning. All of us women trapped inside the bodies of women. 9. We were women trapped inside the bodies of women until we were not. And then we flew out of the car, between the window slit, from behind the skip, from shallow burials and disco funerals. We rose and remembered and returned, back to the bar, back to what the skin had learned. We gathered like smoke and loved. George completed her shot. Angel inhaled the line for the toilets, and I lifted my pint glass to the lambent light, and we were all there, caught in its amber, pulled through the earth, birthed back to the beginning, looking through the holes in us to who we might have been. 10. We were looking through the holes in us to who we might have been. How were we to know the weight of a hole? How heavy it is, how bright, how egg. See, I am sitting at my desk, unthinking, the dinner beginning its curl toward me. I might have been the sort of woman who makes dinner or mistakes or the bed she'll be buried in. I might have been a quiet woman in a loud body. I might have lived gloriously, badly, getting everything wrong, which is my right. But here, we turn from the cinemas at the center of us, afraid of ourselves, our seditious genetics, examining our faces as though they are relics. 11. Examine our faces as though they are relics. Nikoli Zakika, Zikili Zgasa, Salome Masua, Samangili Naupol, Crystal Turner, Madoe Mafubidu, Solissa Nkiana, Udi Similane, Mariela Franco, Fannyman Eddy, Luana Barbosa dos Reos Santos, Elena Grigoreva, Kylan Schultz, Roxanne Ellis, Michelle Abdil, Monica Briones, Maria Pia Castro, Nicole Saavedra Balmondes, Anna Crook, Rebecca Wright, Molly Olgan, Susanna Sanwea, Carolina Torres, Cynthia Leslie Valaquez, Elisa Pomerelli, Bonangele Sisanda Gomidi, Lemakaso Pooling, Sakia Gunn. The glamour of the dead. Here we are proud, draped in suits like funeral shrouds. 12. Draped in suits like funeral shrouds we return, 3 pieces sewn in bone and belonging, hemlined in headlines, threaded in chromosomes. A cravat bleeds, white cotton clenches. Note the wire fences woven into the fabric, grave markers. A suit is also an inheritance. We hold on to the end of red thread, bull dykes bellowing in a herringbone labyrinth, and pull, our faces blunt instruments. Remember the running stitch, sister, the catch stitch, chain. We are suited in suits, our lineage a lemniscate skein. Remind me again, what is the healing time of a stitch? These suits on girls, armor, mother, womb. See how everything changes in the changing room. 13. Everything changes in the changing room. We strip down to the kernels of girls with men's faces, bury our breasts for the dogs, abacus chest, bulls lassoed by bra straps by mathematics. We float out of our uniforms, a pale steam haunt as cherry blossom ejaculates from the showerheads. It's here we learn to fight, that fighting is backward kissing, that all fists return to their source. I once planted a fist in a boy, and it flowered. I wear it pinned to my lapel, a bruised lavender. But look at us now, boys, lined up like snooker balls. Oh, tonight, boys, the stars are glory holes. 14. Tonight, boys, the stars are glory holes. This is not a safe space, but it is brave. We knit the edges of the dance floor. After all that, we eroticize survival, dressed in exits, municipal leather, council flat tweed, twill, denim, a shaven image, handkerchiefs, semaphore from ripped jeans, pockets wink, steel zips lick their lips, lapels flutter and lay their gifts on the ground. We are water in the act of drinking itself. This is not a brave space, but it is ecstatic. And are we not all portable glory holes? We have risen from the dead to reclaim our fucking. Schrodinger's daughters, tough kids, dust kings, and the crown. Dust kings, tough kids, we had nothing, and we shared it. Haunting the halls of our bodies this much, each of us remembers nursing a wound, a violet baby, red in water. Oh, hail the nonconformist daughter. They would have left her if she'd begged forgiveness, but some women are buried in the graves between their legs. Some women are trapped inside the bodies of women, looking through the holes in us to who we might have been, examining our faces as though they are relics, draped in suits like funeral shrouds. But everything changes in the changing room. Oh, tonight, boys, the stars are glory holes, and every snow globe holds a gutter gold angel. Thank you.
Hello again. Yeah, that was amazing. Feels kind of nice to have a little pause of silence after that, rather than filling it with talking. The incomplete gaps in the archive. Having paused. I wondered what it was like for everyone seeing your work in the exhibition cases. Anthony, I don't know. And also the description of your work as well on the panel.
Yeah, I'm doing this again, aren't I? It was incredibly moving to see what was in the exhibition case, because what was important to me is the idea that authorship isn't single, and this for me came out very strongly in the archival project. So I believe that we've already spoken earlier in the podcast, which I hope you'll enjoy at some future point, and also tonight we've spoken about the ways in which our work and our life is intertwined. And in the display I was very pleased there were poems by my father, who I hadn't remembered had done sort of creative writing exercises to amuse my brother and me, responding to the calls of birds in fruit trees around our house in Trinidad. There's also a page from a children's book which was to do with balloons. Balloons, said the balloon man. So even that is a call to gathering. And also there is the small pamphlet I started to make. I started to handwrite Caroline Bergvall during the lockdown phase of the pandemic in the UK, though I was in fact locked down in Trinidad, where things were handled differently and I think rather better, if I may say so. Then Caroline Bergvall curated an improvised show called Night and Refuge, which looked at the different definitions of light as it passes from twilight into deep night, and people improvised sections one after another. And of course I had to do research-based improvisation. So one of the things I did, because I grew up with several languages, is look at my mother's old French books and phrases of equivalence, and non-equivalence, for starriness, for darkness, for crépuscule, for nuit profonde, and make this into this handwritten book. So I was very pleased. And what I would actually like to do is apologize for the short wait of my initial reading. And I don't intend this to be a judgment on anyone. But as Aeschylus says, a great ox is sitting on my tongue. And that's the silence of the innumerable names of the dead who are and are not on the news at the moment. And I'm inspired to mention this partly because of Joelle's bravery with her litany of the dead. And if I may, I'd like to do what I intended to do in the beginning. And during the course of the archival project, I was extremely moved that Yusuf Kazmia, a Palestinian British poet, wrote a poem called Communion, which he dedicated to me under my baptismal name, Anthony Ezekiel. And I'd like to read this poem in lieu of my own because I honestly, from this archival project, have more of an appetite for other people's words. That's what it's left me with, a growing appetite for the intertwining in the life of the words of us all. Communion. We grow nothing, only the sky. Lentils because of what they are. What will be of them at the Last Supper, what we call food, so as to remember our bodies fleetingly? What takes time while giving time, abundant times for us to be hosted by air while straying differing directions to distant fates. Those lentils are not sifted, they are pure and impure, split and whole. With air and dust we throw them somewhere, a chosen somewhere, a premeditated somewhere, and wait for them to grow as we grow. Lentils for the mouths that were, the ultimate gift. This is in no way an unconditional gift or one given to us in our own hands, but to say that the hands that delivered them to us looked too big. Healthy hands, hands from a non-camp, hands that can write names, transliterated names, without hesitation. Hands that can write imitations of misery with scrupulous detail, without any fear of going hungry, without any fear of being struck off the UN register. Unlike our hands, the Quran's lentils, those that feature in the holy books in our shared mouth. To steal from the bird's beak, dreams my mother. The birds that never live in the camp but hover over us in season. The watery lentils, the inexhaustible treasures of the poor. The drowned lentils, the floating lentils in collective imaginations. The often talked about of food, the overwritten of bearings. Why lentils, Anthony? To eat textually, to eat the archive, to eat that which cannot be eaten, to eat the deluge of tears long confused with salt, to eat the exodus in us as companions, to eat the dreams that could have been truer, to eat them in the presence of a tongue blocking roots, places, and times, to eat them in order to witness the edible as a witness to us. My mother, who was too young to count and too young for her younger siblings to be left in her care, helplessly bore witness to one of them swallowing uncooked grains and dying. The parents were ploughing somebody else's fields and scattering their seeds. My mother still dreams benignly of full stomachs, in her words, full but not too full like our vowels, never bloated. To this day, she recalls its fragments, illicit memories of illicit places. Like the parting in my sister's hair is my mother's. What before our eyes is one time, what in our eyes is another. To say, both sides are remainders of something, and the intended wholeness is a mere scrap for what will touch the cooked and later snap. To make them redder, my mother cooks the lentils with our blood, and if you ask what it is that she does to the pot, I would rather not tell you, but will whisper it when we next meet. I will remind you, before food is devoured, the bubbling away of something that returns in some shape or form as something more or less than the original. The crying, there's no point to stop, the ending of what is ours in full, as though to say, fuck this world for what it will be. Fuck it. The leftover of the generous. Hands deeply immersed in the extras, we agree. Eating is not swallowing, but touching upon the touched, rendering the moon as fleshly as possible in friendship and in text. With your eyes still catching the sight, you stir in all directions. None is fixed, you say. None is singular. You stir in your absences and stir in the hope of that created by you, what buds and eventually snaps, what buds again. The season is the season. Secrets hurled in scaled scales for days past. That is Yusuf Kazmieh from Eating the Archive.
Yeah.
Thank you. And the final thing I'll say about that is that it speaks to what we've all been doing, because Yusuf and I have been poets in conversation for many, many years now. And while I was working on this archival project, he was actually writing up academically and creatively his thoughts on archives and archiving. So there's a way in what is intertextual and ephemeral, what is unrecorded, which was literally us cooking dinner for him and his wife and daughter, that is recorded in these traces. So this book ought to be part of the archive, and I will be presenting it to Justine.
You can hold it. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Gail, how did you feel seeing your work in the display case?
Better hair was my thought. The hair I had at the start of this project was the hair I had when I was 6. The hair I have now is probably the hair I wanted to have when I was 6. I think there's a way in which I already feel that the archive has a life of its own, and that's because of a whole range of people who are in this room. One of them is Viv Kemp, who I want to thank for bringing a kind of interpretive lens to the materials and to making sense of them in ways that I perhaps couldn't have, and seeing things in them that I didn't. So I'm very indebted to them for the time and attention they've brought to that. And I love that already these materials have been in the hands of PhD students and have had that kind of critical lens, because I think the poet and critic probably do need each other. I say that as someone who tries to do both sometimes, but you know, there's a part to be played in this, of that work of interpretation, which is not my work to do. So I suppose I already feel a certain detachment from the materials in a way that is really good, because I think it means they now have a life, hopefully, of their own. And so it's lovely to see them go and live that life, and to be read, and for associations to be made by other people. So it's a real pleasure and slightly strange. I think we're all having that feeling. Like, it's actually the biggest pleasure, probably seeing everybody else's materials and not my own, because there's always a little bit of a cringe, I think, but yeah.
Yeah. Jay?
Yeah, it's a funny one, because you sort of understand why in the past people have sort of waited till they're dead. You know, like you, I looked at everyone else and was like, oh yeah, legit, and then I was like, what is this weird sort of rambling nonsense that this person's did? But yeah, it is a bit strange to see yourself in a format that ordinarily you would see as a kind of historical format, I suppose. There's a real assumption of time past that I think we are coming up against and kind of trying to reimagine, and that's quite an interesting place to kind of be in. But I think also I've sort of felt like I'd said this in the podcast as well. Like I can see the gaps as well. And that's really weird, because I don't think that matters at all, because it is what it is. But as a lived experience, if we're going to talk about a living archive, I suppose, there is the lived experience of the live person that has contributed. And I think I'm kind of almost like recording my thoughts on that as I kind of look around it, because I'm kind of, like I was saying, I sort of feel like I've got a lot of work to do in terms of making something coherent. And I don't know if that's necessary. Maybe I could just live my life and not think about that. But there is something about this reflective process that makes me question why the gaps exist that I know exist, and it's a very kind of internal, introspective process. So yeah, it's really interesting and kind of quite thought-provoking, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is something very voyeuristic about it, which is thrilling for me personally.
Voyeuristic. You're
Well, it's because when we were asked to do the process, so the first thing that happens is like you curate. You curate the stuff that's going to be curated. But I made a decision with Justine pretty much early on that I was just going to open everything and put everything in there, because I think there's something really powerful for someone like me anyway to not have control, you know. And so the first thing when I walked in is what they chose to display. And it's the spiders that I wrote about like 20 years ago. And I obsessively worked on this novel, Horror Stories. It was a play and everything. And the meaning of spiders as the monstrous feminine, the symbolism of fear. And I worked so hard on it, and I wrote a novel, and it was never published. So I had a brief moment of feeling really pleased for her, that finally, you know, people were looking at these really insane ideas that I was invested in. The whole thing for me just feels an absolute privilege. It really does, that anybody wants to engage with my work on that level and to look at it. So, and it's changing the way I think about how I work as well. Because now I'm always worried about like writing weird little things in notebooks. But as Jay was saying, it's the gaps. So trying to think in a way, I don't know if it's affected anyone else, but I'm sort of thinking about how the marks I make, really, I suppose.
Has it affected anyone else? The marks you make?
Once again, doing the survey. So it hasn't affected the marks I make, but what it has done is seed another project. And I think one of the things we all talked about was the way that pausing and reflecting and having a chance to look back on our practice meant that we started thinking of more things to write. So this is the tip of the iceberg. Expect much, much more. This has been very inspirational as a year to spend alone and together. And I've been thinking of the way the city resonates with memories, so literally reading the stones of Norwich, and I'm going to be presenting something on that in Manchester next week, and I'll be returning to Hugh of St. Victor and memory palaces, and hoping to write more just about reading the stones of Norwich and Norfolk more widely.
I guess I was just like, no, it hasn't really. There aren't that many marks being made. I would like there to be more. And I think maybe that's something to say, like, there's a slight feeling of longing maybe in me about a time in my life when I had a very clear sense of what I was doing. I was working on this Father Mather commission. I knew what the project was. I knew the timeline. I knew how many pages I had. And I had all these ideas. And I'm at a very different part in my creative practice now, and maybe that's worth saying, because this is the very unsexy part where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, and it's a mess, and I don't have a clear sense of the title of the next book and structure, and I kind of look at this and go, you know, I want this now. And I think it's maybe important just to say, you know, I'd like to say, I've come out of this project and now I know exactly what my second book is, but I haven't got a clue. And that's as important, I think, as what we can look back on. It's always easy to look back retrospectively and see the coherence, but the gaps, I think, for some of us now are like lived experiences of like, ooh, what is the sequence I need to write that will make this book that I'm trying to put together cohere? Or like, how do I revise this poem that I've been carrying with me for more than a year? Or so I don't know where I am. I'm just trying to make any kind of marks right now and hope that some of them will turn into decent poems.
We've kind of come to the end of the time. Unless you have any pressing projects that have arisen you want to share. So maybe we should move to the stage of eating the archive. Not the literal display cabinets, but I think there are refreshments outside. Oh yeah, and Jeremy?
I don't know how to do this now, because everyone's sitting down, and if I stand up, I'm sort of kind of moving over. Where do I stand? I'm going to come over here. Is this on? No. Okay. Will, sorry, you look rather ambushed, but that's kind of the idea, is that I just wanted to thank you personally for the role that you played in this project, and I'm sure all the other poets would, because, you know, characteristically, you've taken a very unassuming role here this evening asking the questions, but as Sarah said, you've also made a donation of your archive. And I just wanted to, just a little memory that I thought would sort of take us back to the start of the project. I remember we went for lunch after the launch event back in September last year. And sort of as happened today, as tends to happen on these occasions, it's kind of difficult to keep a group together moving around campus when everyone's talking, everybody's interested in stuff. And we became separated, and I was walking with Anthony, just sort of saying, I'm sure we'll bump into them around the labyrinth of UEA at some point. And Anthony, I don't know if you remember, but you gave me a word, which I think is one of the things that poets do, give people words. And I think it was an Icelandic word, but you translated it for me, and it was, it meant unheardable.
Difficult to herd, backbreaking.
Yes, difficult to herd.
Yes.
And is that right? Is it Icelandic?
It is.
Yeah. That this was the word describing the situation and the poets and the whole group, the unheardable, the difficult to herd. And it just seemed that has been a sort of a kind of motto word for me through this project. Because, you know, uncollected, it feels really important to what this project has tried to do, not to herd, you know, to collect, to archive, but also not to constrain, not to limit. At the same time, there has been the work of herding. And Will, that's what you have done on this project, just enormously well in all ways. And I just wanted to say that word in recognition of your achievement and contribution. So thank you.
Thank you. Christine and everyone involved in the project. I'm not going to start saying names because I will leave people out. But yeah, it's as Anthony was saying, the archive is the residue of everyone who isn't in the archive, or the little bits of them that are. And yeah, hope everyone will take that with them, make their own. Yeah. And yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Let's go back outside.